The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum sparkled under crystal chandeliers as New York's wealthiest families gathered for the annual Children's Hope Charity Gala. Diamond earrings caught the light as women in designer gowns glided across marble floors, while men in custom tuxedos discussed business deals over champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At the center of it all stood the Whitmore family, a dynasty that had built their fortune in real estate over 3 generations. Richard Whitmore, now 72 with silver hair and sharp eyes, surveyed the room like a king watching over his kingdom. His empire stretched across Manhattan with office towers and luxury developments bearing the Whitmore name throughout the city. "Father, the Hendersons are here," said his son Blake, adjusting his gold cufflinks as he approached. Blake was everything Richard had groomed him to be: confident, well-connected, and ruthless in business. At 45, he ran the day-to-day operations of Whitmore Industries, while his father focused on the bigger picture. Standing beside Blake was his wife Catherine, a former socialite who had married into the family 15 years ago. She wore a stunning red dress that probably cost more than a car, and her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move even when she turned her head quickly to scan the crowd for important people to greet. "We should speak with them about the Chicago project," Richard said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Their connections there could be valuable. The Whitmore family had a way of moving through these events like sharks in water. They knew exactly who to talk to, what to say, and how to position themselves for maximum advantage. Every conversation was a potential business opportunity. Every handshake a chance to expand their influence. Across town, 22-year-old Maya Rodriguez was getting ready for the same event, though her preparations looked very different. In her small apartment near Columbia University, she carefully pressed a simple black dress she had bought at a discount store 6 months ago. As a graduate student studying business administration, she worked part-time with an event planning company to help pay her bills. Maya's job tonight was to assist with the coordination of the gala, making sure guests had everything they needed, helping with any problems that came up, and generally staying invisible while keeping everything running smoothly. She had done dozens of events like this, moving quietly through crowds of wealthy people who rarely noticed her existence. What none of these wealthy guests knew was that Maya's father, David Rodriguez, was the CEO and founder of Rodriguez Technology Solutions, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. His company had quietly become a major player in the industry, developing software and systems that powered everything from financial institutions to government agencies. David had built his company from nothing, starting in a garage 25 years ago with just his coding skills and determination. Now Rodriguez Technology Solutions was worth billions, but David had always been private about his success. He drove a modest car, lived in a comfortable but not flashy house, and most importantly, he had raised his daughter to understand the value of hard work and treating everyone with respect. Maya had grown up knowing her father was successful, but she had never wanted special treatment because of it. She used her mother's maiden name professionally and insisted on making her own way in the world. Her father respected this choice, though he worried about her working such demanding jobs while pursuing her degree. Tonight, David was actually attending the same gala, though Maya didn't know it. He had been invited as a potential major donor, and while he usually avoided these types of social events, his company was considering some charitable partnerships that made his attendance worthwhile. Back at the museum, the Whitmore family worked the room with practiced efficiency. Richard spoke with oil executives about energy investments, while Blake discussed luxury hotel developments with foreign investors. Catherine charmed the wives of important men, gathering information that often proved more valuable than the business cards her husband collected. The Peterson deal should close next month, Blake told his father during a brief moment when they stood together. And if we can land the Rodriguez technology contract, we'll have the funding secured for the Manhattan project. Richard nodded approvingly. The Rodriguez technology deal was the big one, a $750 million development contract that would set the Whitmore family up for the next decade. They had been negotiating for months, and Richard was confident they would win the contract. After all, the Whitmores always got what they wanted. "Have you met this Rodriguez fellow?" Richard asked. "Not yet," Blake replied. "He's supposed to be here tonight, but apparently he keeps a low profile. Very private, from what I hear." Catherine joined them, having finished her conversation with the mayor's wife. "Did I hear you talking about David Rodriguez? I've been trying to find out more about him for weeks. Nobody seems to know much about his personal life." "As long as his money is real, I don't care about his personal life," Richard said with a slight smile, though it would be good to make a connection tonight if possible. Meanwhile, Maya had arrived at the museum and was busy with her event coordination duties. She checked on the catering stations, made sure the auction items were properly displayed, and handled a dozen small problems that guests would never even notice. Her supervisor had praised her work ethic and attention to detail, qualities that came from the values her parents had instilled in her. As she moved through the crowd carrying a tray of champagne glasses to refill the bar station, Maya noticed how the wealthy guests seemed to look right through her. To them, she was just part of the background, like the flowers or the music, necessary for the event but not worthy of acknowledgement as a person. This didn't bother Maya much anymore. She had learned to observe these people from her invisible position, watching how they interacted with each other versus how they treated service workers. The differences were often shocking, but they had taught her valuable lessons about character and integrity. What she didn't realize was that tonight would be different. Tonight, her two worlds, the one where she worked quietly in the background, and the one where her father's success could change everything, were about to collide in a way that would expose the true nature of the people around her. David Rodriguez had arrived at the museum and was making his way through the crowd, politely declining conversations with people who wanted to discuss business. He was looking forward to seeing Maya, though he planned to keep his distance and let her work without interference. He was proud of her independence and didn't want to complicate her evening. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal the ugly truth beneath the glittering surface of high society, and change the lives of everyone involved forever. The collision happened so fast that Maya barely had time to react. One moment she was carefully carrying a tray of champagne glasses through the crowded ballroom, and the next moment she found herself face to face with an angry woman in an expensive red dress, champagne dripping from the fabric onto the marble floor. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." Maya immediately set down her tray and reached for the napkins tucked into her apron. "Let me help you clean that up. I'm really, truly sorry about this." Catherine Whitmore stared down at the wet spots on her designer gown, with the kind of fury that only comes from someone who has never been told no in their entire life. The dress had cost $12,000, and now it was ruined by some clumsy server who couldn't even watch where she was going. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" Catherine's voice rose above the gentle hum of conversation around them. Several nearby guests turned to look, their champagne glasses paused halfway to their lips. "This is a custom Valentino, you stupid girl." Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she kept her voice steady and polite. "I understand you're upset, and I take full responsibility. If you give me your contact information, I'm sure we can arrange for the dry cleaning costs or replacement if necessary." "Dry cleaning?" Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think this can be dry cleaned? This dress is ruined, completely ruined. And you think someone like you can afford to replace it?" Blake Whitmore appeared at his wife's side, drawn by the commotion. He took one look at his wife's stained dress and his expression hardened. "What happened here?" "This server crashed into me and destroyed my dress," Catherine said, her voice getting louder. "Look at this mess. I can't believe they let such careless people work at an event like this." Maya tried again to apologize and offer solutions, but Blake cut her off with a wave of his hand. "The damage is done. What's your name?" "I want to speak to your supervisor immediately." "Sir, there's no need to involve my supervisor. This was entirely my fault, and I'm prepared to take responsibility for it. If we could just discuss this calmly." "Calmly?" Catherine's voice reached a pitch that made people across the room turn to stare. "You destroy my property and then tell me to be calm? Do you know who we are? Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" The crowd around them was growing larger now, with curious onlookers forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Maya could feel dozens of eyes on her, and she wished she could disappear into the floor. But she also felt a spark of anger beginning to burn in her chest. Yes, she had made a mistake, but she had apologized sincerely and offered to make it right. There was no excuse for the way these people were treating her. "I know this is frustrating for you," Maya said, keeping her voice as calm as possible, "but speaking to me this way isn't necessary. I've apologized and I've offered to pay for the damage. What more would you like me to do?" What I'd like is for you to learn your place, Catherine snapped. People like you need to understand that actions have consequences. You can't just stumble around destroying other people's property and expect a simple apology to fix everything. Blake nodded in agreement, his face twisted with disgust. This is exactly the problem with hiring these people for events like this. They don't understand the value of quality, they don't respect what they're handling, and they certainly don't belong in a place like this. Maya felt the words hit her like physical blows. These people, she repeated quietly. What exactly do you mean by that? Oh, don't play dumb, Catherine said with a cruel smile. You know exactly what we mean. People from your background, people who work these kinds of jobs, people who don't have the education or breeding to understand how to behave in sophisticated environments. The circle of onlookers had grown silent now, and Maya could feel their eyes boring into her. Some looked uncomfortable with what they were hearing, but none of them spoke up to defend her. She was completely alone in this confrontation, facing down two wealthy, powerful people who seemed determined to humiliate her as thoroughly as possible. My background? Maya's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. You don't know anything about my background or my education or my family. You're making assumptions based on the fact that I'm working at this event. We don't need to know anything else, Blake said dismissively. Your behavior tonight tells us everything we need to know about your character and your capabilities. An older man with silver hair approached the group. Richard Whitmore, who had been watching the confrontation from across the room. What's going on here? He demanded. This server destroyed Catherine's dress and then had the nerve to argue with us about it, Blake explained quickly. She's being completely inappropriate and unprofessional. Richard looked Maya up and down with the same expression he might use when examining a piece of defective merchandise. Young lady, you've caused quite enough trouble for one evening. I suggest you apologize properly to my family and then remove yourself from this event before you cause any more problems. Maya felt something inside her snap. She had spent the entire evening being invisible, being ignored, being treated like she didn't even exist as a human being. And now, after a simple accident, these people were talking to her like she was garbage, like she was less than human, like she deserved to be humiliated in front of all these witnesses. I've already apologized, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent circle of onlookers. Multiple times. I've offered to pay for the damage. I've offered to contact my supervisor. I've done everything possible to make this right. But apparently that's not enough for you. What you really want is for me to grovel, to accept that I'm somehow less than you because of how I look or where you assume I come from. The ballroom had gone almost completely quiet now. Even the string quartet seemed to have stopped playing. How dare you? Catherine hissed. How dare you stand there and lecture us after what you've done? You're nothing but a clumsy server who doesn't know her place. My place? Maya repeated, and now there was fire in her eyes. And where exactly do you think my place is? Certainly not here, Richard said coldly. Not among people who have worked hard to earn their position in society. Not among people who understand responsibility and consequences. Maya looked around at the crowd of faces surrounding her, some hostile, some uncomfortable, some simply curious to see how this drama would play out. She thought about her father, probably somewhere in this very room, and how proud he would be of her dignity in this moment. She thought about all the lessons he had taught her about treating everyone with respect, regardless of their position or background. You're absolutely right, she said finally, her voice calm and clear. I don't belong here. Not because of my job or my background or anything else you've assumed about me. I don't belong here because I have something you clearly don't have. Basic human decency. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya picked up her tray, looked each of the Whitmores in the eye, and added quietly, I hope you never have to learn what it feels like to be treated the way you've treated me tonight. And with that, she walked away, leaving the Whitmore family standing in the center of a crowd of witnesses, completely unaware that their words had just cost them everything. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a technology journalist for the New York Business Journal, had been standing near the Champagne station when the confrontation began. As a reporter who covered the intersection of business and social issues, she had developed an instinct for recognizing important moments when they happened. This felt like one of those moments. She had discreetly pulled out her phone and recorded the latter part of the argument, focusing particularly on the Whitmore family's cruel comments about people like her and knowing her place. Jennifer had covered enough stories about workplace discrimination and social inequality to recognize the significance of what she was witnessing. What Jennifer didn't know, what none of the witnesses knew, was that David Rodriguez had been standing at the edge of the crowd the entire time, watching his daughter handle the situation with a grace and dignity that made his heart swell with pride, even as it broke with anger. David had arrived at the gala late, having been delayed by an emergency board meeting about a potential acquisition. He had spotted Maya across the room earlier and had been making his way over to say a quiet hello when the accident happened. Instead of intervening, he had chosen to watch and see how his daughter would handle herself. Now, as Maya walked away from the confrontation with her head held high, David felt a complex mixture of emotions. He was proud of how she had conducted herself, angry at how she had been treated, and grimly satisfied that he now knew exactly what kind of people the Whitmores really were. This was particularly significant because David had been in negotiations with Whitmore Industries for months about a massive development contract. The deal would have provided Rodriguez Technology Solutions with office space and data centers across 3 major cities, while giving the Whitmores access to the kind of cutting-edge technology infrastructure that could transform their business model. The contract was worth $750 million over 10 years, and it would have been the largest deal in Whitmore Industries history. Richard Whitmore had been practically salivating over the opportunity, sending increasingly desperate messages about how much his company wanted to work with Rodriguez Technology Solutions. David had been leaning toward approving the deal. The Whitmores had a solid reputation in real estate development, their financial projections were sound, and the partnership would have been mutually beneficial. But now, after watching how they treated his daughter, David knew that no amount of money could make him want to do business with people like this. As the crowd began to disperse and conversations resumed around the ballroom, David made his way toward the Whitmore family. He had made a decision, but he wanted to give them one more chance to show their true character. "Excuse me," he said politely, approaching Richard Whitmore. "I believe you're Richard Whitmore from Whitmore Industries." Richard's demeanor immediately shifted from irritated to charming as he turned to face the newcomer. "Yes, that's right. And you are?" "David Rodriguez from Rodriguez Technology Solutions." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Richard's eyes widened and his smile became so broad it looked painful. "Mr. Rodriguez, what a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I've been hoping we'd have a chance to connect tonight." Blake and Catherine quickly joined the conversation, their earlier anger completely forgotten in the presence of someone who could make them incredibly wealthy. Catherine's stained dress was suddenly unimportant compared to the opportunity to charm this billionaire technology executive. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Blake Whitmore, Richard's son and COO of our company," Blake said, extending his hand eagerly. "And this is my wife, Catherine. We're such admirers of what you've built with Rodriguez Technology Solutions." David shook their hands politely, noting how different their behavior was now compared to how they had just treated Maya. "Thank you. I understand we've been discussing a potential partnership." "Oh yes," Richard said enthusiastically. "We're incredibly excited about the possibility of working together. Your company's reputation for innovation and excellence aligns perfectly with our values at Whitmore Industries." "Values," David thought grimly. "I'm curious about those values, actually. What would you say defines Whitmore Industries' approach to business relationships?" "We believe in treating everyone with respect and professionalism," Catherine jumped in, apparently having completely forgotten her behavior from 10 minutes earlier. "We think that success comes from building strong relationships based on mutual respect and shared goals." "Absolutely," Blake agreed. "We pride ourselves on our integrity and our commitment to working with partners who share our high standards." David nodded thoughtfully, allowing them to continue digging their own grave. "That's interesting. I actually witnessed something earlier this evening that made me curious about how your family handles challenging situations." "Oh?" Richard's smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "There was an incident with one of the event staff. A young woman accidentally spilled something on your daughter-in-law's dress. I was impressed by how professionally the young woman handled the situation, but I was somewhat surprised by your family's response." The color drained from Catherine's face as she realized what David was referring to. Blake's jaw tightened and Richard's eyes darted nervously between his family members. "Oh, that," Catherine said with a forced laugh. That was just a minor misunderstanding. The server was very clumsy and I'm afraid I was having a bad evening. You know how these things go. Actually, I'm not sure I do, David said calmly. Could you help me understand what you meant when you said that people like her don't belong at events like this? The silence that followed was deafening. Blake cleared his throat uncomfortably while Catherine's face went from pale to bright red. Richard tried to maintain his composure, but David could see the panic beginning to set in. I think there may have been some misunderstanding, Richard said carefully. We certainly didn't mean anything inappropriate. Sometimes in the heat of the moment words come out wrong. I see, David said. And when you told her to learn her place and said she didn't have the education or breeding to understand how to behave in sophisticated environments, what did you mean by that? Now all three Whitmores looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Other guests were beginning to notice their conversation, and word was starting to spread that David Rodriguez was speaking with the Whitmore family. Mr. Rodriguez, Blake said desperately, I think you may have misunderstood the situation. We were simply frustrated by the accident, and perhaps we reacted more strongly than we should have. But it certainly wasn't anything personal, and it definitely doesn't reflect our business values. David studied Blake's face for a moment, then looked at Catherine and Richard. I appreciate your clarification. It's always interesting to see how people treat others when they think there are no consequences for their actions. There won't be any consequences, will there? Catherine asked nervously. I mean, this was just a minor incident between strangers. It has nothing to do with business, David smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Actually, I think it has everything to do with business. You see, the young woman you were so cruel to this evening, the one you said didn't belong here, the one you told to learn her place, that was my daughter. The impact of his words was like a physical blow. Richard actually staggered backward, his face going white. Blake's mouth fell open and Catherine made a small choking sound. Your daughter? Richard whispered. My daughter Maya, David confirmed. She works part-time while completing her MBA at Columbia University. She's been supporting herself through school because she believes in earning her own way in the world. And tonight you treated her like garbage because you assumed she was beneath you. The Whitmores stood frozen in horror, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. Around them, other guests had begun to notice that something dramatic was happening, and conversations were starting to quiet as people strained to listen. Mr. Rodriguez, Richard said urgently, please let us explain. We had no idea who she was. If you had known she was my daughter, you would have treated her with respect? David interrupted. But since you thought she was just a working student trying to pay for college, it was acceptable to humiliate her in front of a room full of people. None of them had an answer for that because they all knew he was absolutely right. David looked at each of them one more time, memorizing their faces. I think this conversation has been very enlightening. Thank you for showing me exactly who you really are. And with that, he walked away, leaving the Whitmore family standing in the ruins of their $750 million dreams. Richard Whitmore had barely slept all night. He sat in his mahogany-paneled office at 6 a.m, staring at his phone and willing it to ring. The call from Rodriguez Technology Solutions was supposed to come today, the final approval for the $750 million contract that would secure his family's empire for the next decade. But after last night's disaster at the gala, Richard wasn't sure what to expect. He had tried calling David Rodriguez's office 3 times since arriving at work, but each time he was told that Mr. Rodriguez was unavailable and would return his call when possible. Blake paced back and forth in front of his father's desk, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it all night. Maybe it's not as bad as we think, he said for the 10th time that morning. Maybe he'll be willing to separate business from personal feelings. Are you insane? Catherine snapped from the leather chair where she had been sitting in silence for the past hour. We humiliated his daughter in front of half of New York's elite society. There's no way he's going to forget about that. Richard's assistant knocked on the door and entered with a worried expression. Mr. Whitmore, I have Rodriguez Technology Solutions on line 1. It's David Rodriguez himself. The room fell completely silent. Richard straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and picked up the phone with hands that he hoped weren't visibly shaking. David, good morning. I was hoping to hear from you today. Good morning, Richard. David's voice was calm and professional, giving away nothing. I'm calling about our pending contract. Yes, of course. We're very excited to move forward with the partnership. I think it's going to be tremendously beneficial for both of our companies." There was a pause that seemed to stretch on forever. Blake and Catherine leaned forward in their chairs, straining to hear David's response. "I'm afraid I have some disappointing news, Richard. After careful consideration, Rodriguez Technology Solutions has decided to withdraw from negotiations. We won't be moving forward with the development contract." Richard felt the world tilt sideways. "I'm sorry, what? Could you repeat that?" "We're withdrawing from the deal, effective immediately. Our legal team will be sending formal notification later today, but I wanted to call you personally to let you know." But why?" Richard stammered. "Our negotiations have been going so well. The terms were favorable to both parties." "What changed?" Another pause. "I think you know what changed, Richard." Richard's mind raced desperately for some way to salvage the situation. "David, if this is about last night, I think there may have been some misunderstandings. Perhaps we could meet in person to discuss." "There was no misunderstanding," David said firmly. "I saw exactly who you and your family really are. The way you treated my daughter revealed your true character, and Rodriguez Technology Solutions cannot associate with individuals who demonstrate such fundamental failures of basic human decency." Blake gestured frantically at his father, mouthing, "Put it on speaker." Richard hesitated, then pressed the speakerphone button so his family could hear the conversation. "Mr. Rodriguez," Blake jumped in, "this is Blake Whitmore. I want to personally apologize for what happened last night. We were all under a lot of stress, and we reacted poorly to an unfortunate accident, but surely you can understand that a momentary lapse in judgment shouldn't overshadow months of successful business negotiations." "A momentary lapse in judgment?" David's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. "Is that what you call telling my daughter that people like her don't belong in sophisticated environments? Is that what you call telling her to learn her place?" Catherine couldn't stay silent any longer. "Mr. Rodriguez, I am deeply, truly sorry for my behavior last night. I was upset about my dress and I said things I didn't mean. If I could take it all back, I would. Please don't let one mistake destroy what could be a wonderful business relationship." "Here's what I find interesting, Catherine," David said. "You're not sorry for how you treated my daughter. You're sorry that treating my daughter that way had consequences for you. If Maya had just been some anonymous working student with no powerful connections, you would never have given her another thought." The truth of his words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. None of them could deny it because they all knew he was absolutely right. "David," Richard tried again, his voice taking on a pleading tone that he had never used in business before. "Please reconsider. This deal isn't just important to us. It's important to both of our companies. Think about all the jobs that will be created, all the economic benefits." "I have thought about it," David replied. "I've thought about what it would mean to do business with people who judge others based on their appearance, their job, or their perceived social status. I've thought about what it would mean to partner with people who believe that wealth gives them the right to treat others with cruelty and contempt, and I've decided that no amount of money is worth compromising my company's values." Blake's face had gone pale. "Mr. Rodriguez, without this contract, several of our projects will be in serious jeopardy. We've made commitments based on the expectation that this deal would go through." "That sounds like poor business planning on your part," David said without sympathy. "Perhaps you should have secured the contract before making those commitments." Richard felt panic rising in his chest. The Rodriguez contract wasn't just important, it was essential. Whitmore Industries had leveraged heavily to finance their current projects, betting everything on the assumption that this deal would provide the cash flow they needed. Without it, they would be facing potential bankruptcy within months. "David, please," Richard said, abandoning all pretense of professional dignity. "I'm begging you to reconsider. We made a terrible mistake last night, but we're good people. We're not the monsters you think we are." "Actually, Richard, I think last night showed me exactly who you are. When you thought there would be no consequences for your actions, when you thought you were dealing with someone powerless, you revealed your true nature. And that nature is incompatible with the values that my company stands for." Catherine started to cry, not the elegant tears of a socialite, but the desperate sobs of someone watching her entire world collapse. "Please," she whispered into the phone, "please don't destroy our lives over this." "I'm not destroying your lives," David said calmly. "You destroyed your own lives when you chose to treat my daughter with such cruelty." I'm simply choosing not to reward that behavior with a $750 million contract. Blake made one last desperate attempt. What if we made a substantial donation to charity? What if we publicly apologized? What if we agreed to diversity training for our entire company? There has to be something we can do to make this right. The time to make it right was last night when you had the opportunity to treat a young woman with basic human dignity, David replied. Instead, you chose to humiliate her because you thought she was beneath you. That choice has consequences, and those consequences are not my responsibility. Richard felt all hope draining away. So that's it? There's nothing we can do? Nothing we can say? That's it, David confirmed. Goodbye, Richard. I don't expect we'll speak again. The line went dead, leaving the three Whitmores sitting in stunned silence in the suddenly suffocating office. Outside the windows, New York City continued its relentless pace, but inside this room, time seemed to have stopped. What do we do now? Blake asked quietly. Richard stared at the phone in his hand as if it were a snake that had just bitten him. I don't know, he admitted. I honestly don't know. For the first time in his 72 years, Richard Whitmore, a man who had built an empire through cunning, ruthlessness, and an absolute belief in his own superiority, found himself completely powerless. And it had all been destroyed by a few minutes of cruelty toward a young woman they had thought didn't matter. The reckoning had begun. Dr. Jennifer Walsh published her article 3 days after the gala, and within hours it had exploded across social media platforms like wildfire. The headline read, "When Privilege Meets Consequence, How a Billionaire Family's Cruelty Cost Them Everything." The article included carefully selected quotes from the confrontation, along with Jennifer's analysis of what the incident revealed about wealth, power, and social inequality in America. But what really made the story go viral was the dramatic irony. The fact that the Whitmores had destroyed a $750 million deal by bullying the daughter of the very man they were trying to impress within 24 hours. The video clips that Jennifer had recorded were being shared millions of times across every social platform. The hashtag #KnowYourPlace became a rallying cry for people sharing their own stories of being mistreated by wealthy or powerful individuals. Maya Rodriguez found herself at the center of a media storm she had never wanted or expected. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from news outlets, talk shows, and podcasts. Her social media accounts, which had been private and low-key, suddenly had thousands of followers and messages of support from around the world. I never wanted this kind of attention, Maya told her father as they sat in his home office, watching news coverage of the story on 3 different channels simultaneously. I just wanted to finish school and start my career quietly. David reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand. I know, sweetheart. But sometimes the most important conversations happen when we least expect them. You've become a symbol of something bigger than yourself. A symbol of what? Of dignity in the face of cruelty. Of grace under pressure. Of the fact that character isn't determined by wealth or status, but by how we treat others when we think no one important is watching. Meanwhile, the Whitmore family was learning what it felt like to be on the wrong side of public opinion. The story had been picked up by major news networks, and the family found themselves being discussed on morning talk shows, late-night comedy programs, and editorial pages across the country. The financial consequences had been swift and devastating. Within a week of David Rodriguez withdrawing from their contract, 3 other major business partners had announced they were reevaluating their relationships with Whitmore Industries. 2 luxury hotel chains canceled management contracts, citing concerns about the company's brand alignment with their values. Richard's longtime friend and business partner, Michael Chen, called an emergency meeting at his downtown office. "Richard, I've known you for 30 years, Michael said, his face grim. But I can't in good conscience continue our partnership after what happened. My investors are pulling out, and frankly, I don't blame them." "Michael, please," Richard pleaded. "You know me. You know I'm not really like that. It was one bad moment, one terrible mistake." "That's just it, Richard. I think that moment revealed exactly who you really are. I've watched you operate for decades, and now I'm wondering how many other moments like this I missed because the victims weren't connected to someone powerful enough to fight back." Blake was dealing with his own professional catastrophe. His tech startup, which had been on the verge of securing $20 million in Series B funding, watched helplessly as investor after investor withdrew from negotiations. The venture capital firm that had been leading the funding round issued a brief statement saying they could not move forward with investments in companies associated with discriminatory behavior. Catherine faced social exile from the charitable organizations and cultural institutions that had defined her identity for 15 years. The Metropolitan Museum quietly asked her to step down from their board of trustees. The Children's Hope Foundation, the very charity whose gala had been the scene of the confrontation, issued a public statement distancing themselves from her behavior. "I used to have lunch with my friends every Tuesday at the plaza," Catherine told her husband through tears. "Yesterday I went there and they all pretended not to see me. These are people I've known for years, people whose children played with our children, and now they act like I have some kind of contagious disease." But the most devastating blow came when the bank started calling. Whitmore Industries had structured their financing around the assumption that the Rodriguez contract would provide steady cash flow for the next decade. Without that guaranteed income, their debt-to-equity ratio became untenable almost overnight. "We have 60 days to restructure our loans or face foreclosure proceedings on the Manhattan project," Blake reported to his father during what had become their daily crisis management meetings. "The Chicago development is already in default, and the Miami properties are heading in the same direction." Richard sat behind his desk, looking older than his 72 years. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and dominated negotiations now struggled to make it through each day. "How much do we need to stabilize everything?" "At minimum, $400 million, and that's assuming we can renegotiate terms with our creditors. Realistically, we're looking at complete liquidation of assets within 6 months." The irony was not lost on any of them. A family that had spent decades accumulating wealth and power was being brought down by a few minutes of cruelty toward someone they had considered insignificant. Maya, meanwhile, had made a decision about how to use the unwanted spotlight that had been thrust upon her. Instead of hiding from the attention, she chose to transform it into something positive. She started speaking at business schools and corporate events about dignity, respect, and the importance of character and leadership. Her message was simple but powerful. How you treat people when you think there are no consequences reveals who you really are. And in today's connected world, there are always consequences. Success isn't just about accumulating wealth or climbing the corporate ladder, she told a packed auditorium at Columbia Business School. True success is about building a life and career that you can be proud of, treating everyone with respect regardless of their position, and understanding that your character is your most valuable asset. David Rodriguez watched his daughter's transformation with a mixture of pride and amazement. The shy graduate student who had quietly worked her way through school had become a powerful voice for change in corporate America. "She's handling this better than I ever could have," David told his wife one evening as they watched Maya being interviewed on a national news program. "She's turned a moment of cruelty into a catalyst for important conversations about respect and dignity in the workplace." 6 months after the gala, the Whitmore empire was gone. The family was forced to sell their Manhattan mansion, their Hamptons estate, and virtually all of their assets to satisfy creditors. Richard filed for personal bankruptcy, while Blake took a mid-level position at a small real estate firm in New Jersey. Catherine moved back in with her parents in Ohio, her social media accounts documenting a very different lifestyle than the one she had previously flaunted. The final irony came when Maya graduated from Columbia with her MBA and was offered a position as vice president of corporate social responsibility at Rodriguez Technology Solutions. Her job would be to ensure that the company's partnerships and business relationships aligned with their values of respect, dignity, and social responsibility. "I want you to make sure we never do business with people who treat others the way the Whitmores treated you," David told his daughter on her first day at work. "Character matters more than profit, and I want our company to reflect that principle in everything we do." Maya accepted the position with the understanding that she would be judged on her own merits, not her family connections. Her first major project was developing a comprehensive vendor and partner evaluation system that included assessments of corporate culture and employee treatment, alongside traditional financial metrics. The story of the Whitmore family's downfall became a cautionary tale taught in business schools across the country. It was a stark reminder that in an age of social media and instant communication, there are no private moments of cruelty, No inconsequential acts of discrimination, and no victims too insignificant to matter. For Maya Rodriguez, the experience had been painful but ultimately transformative. She had learned that standing up for herself and maintaining her dignity was more valuable than any job or social acceptance. She had discovered that her voice could make a difference, and that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply refusing to accept it as normal. The young woman who had once served champagne in the shadows was now helping to shape how one of America's most successful companies approached ethics and social responsibility. And every day she remembered the lesson that had cost the Whitmore family everything. In the end, how you treat others is all that really matters.